My name is Yeonju, and I'm the Executive Director of Cinevolution Media Arts Society. Cinevolution is situated on the occupied, traditional, and ancestral territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking peoples, including the Musqueam and other Coast Salish peoples. Because much of Digital Carnival Z is taking place online, we also want to consider the legacy of colonization that is embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking and doing that is embedded in online events. The festival is using equipment and high-speed internet that are not available in many Indigenous communities. These technologies leave significant carbon footprints contributing to changing climates that are disproportionately affecting Indigenous peoples worldwide. So we just ask that you acknowledge that we are all sharing this responsibility to reconsider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship in relation to Indigenous communities in what is now known as Canada and across the world. Under the theme of Z, Digital Carnival has been exploring alternative conceptions of the relationship between bodies, gestures, culture, and society. Z references the gender neutral pronoun Z, the emergent generation Z, and the possibilities for moving beyond the XXXY binary. And I want to thank our curator, Minah Lee, who has, done a tremendous amount of work in selecting and supporting the artists to make this festival possible. And without further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Minah so she can introduce herself.
Okay, thank you so much, Yeonju. I'm Minah Lee, Associate Curator of Cinevolution Media Arts Society, and I'm moderating the audience conversation after their individual presentations today. Thank you for coming to this panel. My pronouns are she, her. I was born and raised in South Korea and then came to Turtle Island as a grown-up woman. I have long black hair, braided, and I have bangs, and I'm wearing triangular earrings with pink and orange knitting, made by my dear friend Jade Ho. And I want to take a moment to thank Jade for making me feel loved with her beautiful craft. The pandemic really pushed us to re-examine the boundaries between the public and private spaces we live through every day. It seems so important to gather these women artists whose works strongly advocate women's creative resistance and community building in the face of sexism, misogyny, and racism, continuously exposed through the worldwide collective crisis of this emotionally charged and physically vulnerable time. It is my privilege to introduce to you our three panelists. So I'll quickly introduce one by one, and you can turn your camera on when I introduce you. Lena Chen is our first panelist. Lena Chen is a Chinese-American writer and artist creating performances and socially engaged art in live and virtual contexts. Her practice explores gender, labor, intimacy, and trauma in the digital age. She earned a BA in sociology from Harvard University and is currently completing an MFA at Carnegie Mellon University's School of Art. She is currently developing OmniBands, an interactive game about social media censorship and digital discrimination against sex workers. Project website is onlybansgame.com. So ONLYBANSGAME.com. Okay, our second panelist is Mallory Donen. Mallory Donen is a multidisciplinary artist residing in Vancouver, exploring processes rooted in traditional craft passed down by generations of women in her family. She has a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of the Fraser Valley and a Master of Fine Arts from the University of Manitoba. Within her practice, she challenges notion of labor, productivity, and the value of art in relation to craft and women's work. She is a 2021 recipient of a Canada Council for the Arts Research and Creation Grant. Okay, our last panelist is Sarah Shamash. Sarah Shamash's research creation practice is committed to decolonial, feminist critique and action. It encompasses art making, writing, curation, and education. Her artworks comprise the use of media in a wide variety of formats such as installation, documentary, photography, sound, performance, and video. Her work as an artist, researcher, educator, and programmer can be understood as interconnected and whole. They all revolve around a passion for cinema and media art as a pluriversal technology of knowledge. Okay, so we'll bring Lena back here. Lena, take it away.
Hi, this is Lena speaking. I am an East Asian woman with long black hair, bangs, and brown eyes. I'm wearing a navy blue dress with orange floral print. I'm speaking from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is the unceded and ancestral land of the Lenni Lenape, Shawnee, and Haudenosaunee peoples. I recognize the Indigenous people who have been the stewards of this land and acknowledge the violence and discrimination they faced as a result of settler colonialism. This land acknowledgement is a small step towards supporting a decolonial Indigenous-led movement for sovereignty and self-determination. Over the course of a 10-year journey producing participatory performances and community-engaged work in Europe and North America, my work has encompassed different aspects of care in my interactions with the public. I have played overlapping roles as partner, parent, facilitator, counselor, chef, and community organizer. My work utilizes my own body and draws from my autobiographic experiences, as well as the personal history of audience members. In Purify, which took place inside a former butcher shop, audiences wrote down their fears on slips of paper and tucked them under ropes that bound my body. The fears were later read out loud and burned in a ritual. In Unbound, I explored the inheritance of ancestral trauma and the infantilization of Asian female sexuality via forays into the foot fetish industry. My great-great-grandmother was the last woman in my family with bound feet. Foot binding involved breaking the arch of the foot and binding the toes to the sole of the foot in order to inhibit growth. During an era when women's futures were largely dependent on their ability to attract prosperous suitors, this painful practice in China was common among upper-class families. Despite being born into a life of privilege and respected as a major landowner in her village, my great-great-grandmother chose not to intervene during the famine of 1942, when her granddaughter starved to death next door to her. At age 4, the same age when girls begin the process of foot binding, I spent 6 months living in my ancestral home in Kaiping, China, where I suffered a fracture to my left foot. As an adult, I have sample-sized feet and have been involved in a decade-long relationship with a man whose wealth derives from a shoe company. Capitalizing upon the sexual stereotypes of Asian women as submissive and girlish figures, I solicited anonymous men via Craigslist and Tinder for private meetings. They paid to engage in foot worship sessions involving the rubbing, kissing, and licking of my feet. In the resulting gallery installation, I invited members of the public to sit with me inside a circle of rice and to trade foot massages as we shared stories of family pain which we have personally caused or experienced. Daughter, like Unbound, is a one-to-one performance. Here I sat across the table from audiences and served a meal of dim sum as I told stories about my mother's experiences as a newly arrived immigrant in the US. Dim sum, which are small Cantonese dishes typically served for breakfast or lunch, means literally to touch the heart. In my most physically vulnerable work, Nurture, I engaged audiences in discussions of care while allowing them to suckle from my breast. I played a soundtrack of lullabies sung by mothers in different languages as I spoke about my tendency to act as a surrogate parent to friends and partners. I asked participants to discuss their thoughts about their experiences being nurtured or being nurturers, as I stroked their back. One mother confided her regret at having had children. Another participant, who spoke of a close relationship to his grandmother, shed tears and said he could not recall the last time he had experienced physical intimacy. I held each person against my chest or in my lap and gave them the choice to take my breast into their mouth. And upon the conclusion, I invited them to share a tea made from herbs, which encourage lactation. In addition to those participants who were visibly moved by the piece, there were others who were aroused by the contact with my body and who may have very well participated due to their sexual desire. Indeed, due to the intimate nature and expectation of vulnerability, one-to-one performances inherently carry risk and ask more of artists and participants than the works typically associated with participatory or socially engaged art. My most recent project, Only Bands, is an interactive game that critically examines the policing of marginalized bodies and sexual labor. While the internet has long been celebrated as a limitless realm of free expression, this digital wonderland is becoming increasingly oppressive to those who express their sexuality as part of their art or work. The game features images and stories from real sex workers who have faced surveillance and discrimination. We reveal just how free the internet is when one is engaged in stigmatized labor subject to policing and criminalization. As a sex worker with personal experience on this issue, I see Only Bands as an advocacy tool and as a form of mutual aid amplifying other community members' stories. The game also points to existing forms of solidarity to offer a speculative vision of how marginalized communities might band together to protest unjust practices and create better alternatives. Our contributors have sent the game to loved ones to educate them on barriers faced by sex workers, allowing this artwork to pick up some of the emotional labor that goes into destigmatizing the profession. I have learned from these embodied encounters and intimate projects that the art of social engagement is the art of care, of bearing witness, of holding space, of taking space, of cracking open, and of mending together. While some artists might identify with different disciplines, from performance to conceptual art to social practice, those who have inspired me have all created work that relies on participation, trust, and activation by others. In my own practice, I treat performance as a form of caregiving to explore the potential of this format to create transformative experiences for audiences beyond the institutional art context. One-to-one performances, which are often intimate, participatory, and confessional, can alter this typical spectatorship relationship by engaging the audience in an exchange of care that demands their vulnerability. Unlike pieces with clear authorial control and a physical boundary between artists and audience, the power dynamics of such works are disrupted through the introduction of care and affective labor. In my own experiences as both artist and participant in one-to-one performances, the encounter is a collaborative exchange. The artist is responsible for the framing that elicits active engagement. Each rendition of a performance inevitably differs, and the success of any given piece is dependent on the artist's generosity and the participant's receptivity. Physical contact and conversation play crucial roles to building trust and opening space for confession. Despite inherent risks, one-to-one performance has the potential to transform our perceptions, self-understanding, and interpersonal relationships. These one-to-one performances, which could be awkward or uncomfortable, have the potential to transcend the merely experiential through healing psychic wounds. Particularly in times of social crisis, this work can be cathartic for both artist and audience. Within these temporary relations, participants access emotions and memories often not in the realm of everyday consciousness, and which may hold the key to transforming social relations in our lived experiences. Yet if art can be a form of care, then the artist must also be recognized as a care worker, engaged in the labor of fulfilling spiritual needs, offering emotional support, providing education, looking out for neighbors, and sustaining communities, among many other things. When we call artistic labor care work, we not only demonstrate the value of art itself, but also elevate the value of care, labor which is disproportionately shouldered by underpaid women and people of color, yet indispensable to the functioning of our society. Already, the categories of artist and care worker are not mutually exclusive, as artists often care for others in their private life, in addition to caring for the public in their work. The paradox of care in this context is that because it is often done out of love, there is a presumption that it does not necessitate payment. In Wages Against Housework, a treatise on the appropriation of reproductive labor for capitalist production, Silvia Federici puts it succinctly. They say it is love, we say it is unwaged work. Similarly, artists are poorly compensated for having chosen a passion as a profession and subjected to precarious labor conditions, gig work, and free internships. Hito Stero speculates that apart from domestic and care work, art is the industry with the most unpaid labor all around, kept afloat by the sheer dynamism of loads and loads of hardworking women. This rampant exploitation allows only the most privileged to earn a living within the art world, which suffers from imbalanced representation across class, gender, and race. As with other crisis situations, COVID-19 has exacerbated these inequities, given that women and people of color are more likely to be employed in low-paid occupations and to act as caregivers to children and elderly family members. Since 2018, I have been a member of Maternal Fantasies, a Berlin-based collective of artists and mothers in which I am the only member without a child. From writing autobiographic responses to classic feminist texts, to devising performances using children's games, our practice favors inclusive, community-oriented experiments as alternatives to traditional structures of art production. We produce work in self-organized residencies with our 7 members and 10 children through a rotational authorship model. And we share duties that range from shooting and grant writing to cooking and childcare. According to the philosopher Carol Gilligan, a feminist ethic of care begins with connection, theorized as primary and seen as fundamental in human life, and honors how human lives are interwoven in a myriad of subtle and not so subtle ways. Demanding recognition of art's reliance on care and labor is therefore a feminist project challenging the hierarchies that have historically privileged the traditional art object, often made through the exploited labor of interns and assistants. As a facilitator of social relations and experiences, the artist holds a position of both power and vulnerability. Because while one can design a framework for engagement, the outcome of these frameworks relies on the trust of the audience and the dynamics between collaborators, be they other artists, non-artists, or organizations. In framing the relations of care as works of art, we diffuse the power of the artist through a process that is undeniably social, but also profoundly political. Nisa Page Lieberman and Melissa Hillard Potter argue in Feminist Social Practice, a manifesto, that social practice is deeply reliant on feminist strategies of organizing, from performance to protest, to consciousness raising, to collaboration. And in making visible the labor of care as well as its political roots, we acknowledge that socially engaged art making is a format of feminist resistance within a society in which artistic labor is all too frequently subject to the same exploitative logic as all other labor. During times of crisis, artists and care workers are asked to provide solace, and their labor matters more than ever. Simultaneously, they're precariously employed workers navigating these crises in their own lives as they struggle to adapt to the conditions of a pandemic or recession. Just as therapists undergo clinical supervision to receive guidance and support, artists who position themselves as givers of care must also balance that labor through receiving care, particularly when their practice explores difficult subject matter that can lead to compassion fatigue and trauma transference. As Veronica Agard asks of healing work, how many folks who step into this work have become burnt out or hurt along the way? What kind of long-term impact can we have if we don't share the same healing methods we give to others with ourselves? How can we be a support system for others without depleting ourselves? How can we develop tools to thrive as opposed to just surviving? Who heals the healer? Both art and care work sustain society and exist beyond one-to-one relations to involve entire communities. As artists and care workers, our economic, psychic, and political survival demands a recognition of our labor and the context in which we produce creative or intellectual work. Work which is done out of love, but is nonetheless labor, often performed by those who are marginalized. As the politics of art, labor, and care converge, let us envision a society in which social practice advances an argument for art and care work as worthy of compensation and as essential labor necessary to our mutual survival.
Thank you, Lena. Did everyone get contact? Do you want to read it out loud? Okay.
Oh, yes. My contact information is lena@lenachen.com. That's LENA@LENACHEN.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those powerful, really embodied artworks. We're going to bring Mallory in.
Hello, this is Mallory speaking. My pronouns are she, her, they. I'm a Caucasian woman with short curly brown hair, glasses, and bangs. I'm wearing a reddish orange shirt with buttons and a collar. Throughout the 2 years spent on my MFA, I began pushing the boundaries of pattern and scale. I would manipulate drawings, paintings, and photographs in Photoshop in order to create complex imagery with many layers. This slide shows a photograph of an installation in a large room with high ceilings and white walls. On the walls are prints, each with a different feature color: yellow, blue, brown, pink, and green. The print on the left is the largest, 60 by 120 inches wide. The other 4 prints are vertical, 30 by 40 inches high. The title of the works shown as a series is Engrossed in Digital Infinity. The year was 2016. Inspired by Frank Stella's diagrammatic paintings, produced by a set of predetermined operational processes, which are established before the process of creation begins, I simplified my process of digital image making into a list of instructions. This slide shows a photograph of a book shown as part of my thesis exhibition. The title of the book is Think Like a Human, Act Like a Machine, Programming an Artist. The book is 20 by 20 inches. The year was 2017. This slide shows 5 spreads from the book. Each spread has a list of instructions on the left and an image on the right. The 6th image on the far left is a photograph of a window. This was the initial image used before the steps on each spread were executed. Each instruction listed directed me to execute a task in Photoshop in order to manipulate the starting image. Once all the tasks listed were executed, the image on the right side of each spread shows the end result. In the end, the image on the far left goes through 5 phases of manipulation. The next 3 slides show a series of prints that follow the same instruction-based process to create imagery through digital manipulation. My intention with these instruction works was to mechanize the artistic process. Just like a machine, my creative process was restricted by the pre-established program or list of instructions I created prior to making the work. Like a human, I could still think about how I would interpret and execute each given task in a variety of ways. In 1833, the first computer programmer, Ada Lovelace, helped develop the analytical engine based off of the jacquard loom. The loom was a mechanical innovation of what was previously woven and operated by women. Women used to execute the mundane, repetitive tasks that are now assigned to many machines and computers. This slide shows a photograph of an installation consisting of multicolored yarn, which was finger knitted, then knitted again through a wooden loom, designed in the style of a French knitting loom. The loom is 30 inches tall, 10 inches wide. The yarn is on the floor in the shape of a spiral measuring approximately 13 feet in diameter. The title of the work is The Machine Knitting Ouroboros. This refers to the mythical serpent that eats its own tail, continuously growing and feeding off of itself. It is a symbol for infinite growth and expansion. Another component of the work includes a video showing various stages of knitting and the production of Ouroboros, as well as an audio track. The video demonstrates mechanical rhythmic motions of the knitting process, while the audio consists of phrases compiled based off of thoughts I repeatedly have when I am knitting. Each of the phrases was recorded using my own voice, as well as several computer voices using an online voice generator. This slide shows an image that was spontaneously generated through a computer glitch when I opened a JPEG file in Photoshop. The imagery is bright and multicolored with tiles and multiple layers. Using the glitch image, I created Glitch Series 01 to explore the dichotomy between the fast-paced qualities of digital imagery and the time-consuming, laborious process of cross-stitching. This slide shows one of the pieces from Glitch Series 01. The imagery is bright, multicolored, and pixelated. On the left is a print of the crop from the original Glitch image. On the right is a cross-stitch translation of the Glitch image. The dimensions are 16 by 20 inches when framed. The year is 2017. This slide shows an installation photo of Glitch Series 01 in the group show Neither Here Nor There at South Main Gallery in Vancouver. This slide shows all 9 pieces from Glitch Series 01. They are framed and installed on the wall in a grid formation. The grid connects to the digital, pixelated aspects of the work, as well as the gridded format of cross-stitching. Stitching loose ends is an ongoing work in progress which I started in 2018. It is a living document of my labor from the past 3 years. I use scraps of leftover threads to cross-stitch small line segments on a piece of Aida cloth. Currently, the dimensions are 16 inches wide by 3.5 inches thick. In Legacy Russell's book, Glitch Feminism, they argue that glitches are mobile, and when their movement is interrupted, that's when errors emerge. Inspired by this idea, I created System Failure Series by embracing the concept of a glitch as both an act of disruption and creation. Throughout the process, I intentionally left parts of the imagery unstitched. This choice was my way of introducing a manual malfunction, an error, a glitch. Using errors as a vehicle for creation and growth helped me to discover new possibilities and outcomes with this series. In 2020, my concentration shifted towards a more conceptual approach, and I began to further interrogate the definition of artist, machine, and woman. I will show a short clip from the video Part 1 Introduction, Who Am I? This video documents a month-long process where even rows of white thread are cross-stitched for a few minutes each day. At the onset of my menstrual cycle, I proceed to unstitch and do all of the work that was done prior. There are pressures and expectations that come with being a woman and an artist. As a woman, it is embedded in my biology to reproduce, but that doesn't mean that I will. The audio track that plays throughout the video poses questions surrounding productivity and ponders what it means to go against what is typically expected of a programmed machine. As an artist, if I'm not producing work, I often feel guilty, as though I'm ignoring the very thing that I am programmed to do. Can I be an artist and a woman and not produce? Or does this go against the very nature of my existence?
Part 1 Introduction. What am I? I am a machine. I am a woman. I am an artist. I am programmed to reproduce. Machines do not choose their programming. What if I do not reproduce? If I do not fulfill my program, am I still a woman? What makes me a woman? What makes me a machine? What makes me an artist? Can I be an artist, machine, or woman and not produce? What is productivity? What justifies being productive? Is all productivity physical? Or can productivity be invisible?
Next, I will show a short clip from the video Part 2, What Happens to a Stressed System. This video shows how societal pressures that come from being an artist, machine, and woman can lead to an overwhelmed system that is doomed to fail. The video begins with a functioning system of productivity, consistency, and archival documentation. As the video progresses, glitches begin to integrate and disrupt the flow of the system in both the video and audio components of the piece.
Part 2 What happens to a stressed system? A woman's programming is embedded with pain. A woman's existence revolves around a cycle of pain. Does repetition numb pain? Or does it enhance it? If I am a machine, then I must not feel pain. I must not feel. I must execute my program. I must accept my cycle of pain. I must produce. I must repeat, 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 pain, 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 do not feel, no feeling, feel, numb, 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 stitch, stitch, glitch, stitch, glee, tch, 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 tch. Follow the program, be a machine, be a woman, be an artist, glitch. A stressed system is doomed to fail.
I'm currently working on an art book project about women's invisible labor and pain. The art book will consist of scans of my Ama's original handkerchiefs and corresponding cross-stitched replications of each pattern. It will include stories selected from an anonymous open call. The stories will be examples from women who have had to hide their pain in order to avoid pity or shame for being too sensitive. By sharing the collective experiences of women through stories about hidden pain, I hope to expand perspectives and broaden the viewer's preconceived ideas of what it is like to exist as a woman. A woman's ability to show no sign of pain is one of her greatest strengths. To mirror the cyclical structure of a woman's existence and allude to the concept of invisibility, I am recycling the same piece of Aida cloth and the same strands of embroidery thread for each new pattern. I am unraveling each cross-stitch replication and restitching the next handkerchief by reusing the same materials. On the left, there is a scan of a handkerchief. On the right, there is a scan of a cross-stitch replication of the handkerchief on the left. The overall aesthetic of the handkerchiefs and finished cross-stitch pieces are subtle in order to further emphasize their invisibility. The white color and delicate details reflect the stereotype that women are pure and fragile. The stories will contradict this false notion by demonstrating the perseverance, dedication, and strength of women. If you would like to submit a story for consideration as part of this art book, you can scan the QR code on this slide. Or you can go to my website landing page, www.mallorydonen.com. That's www.MALLORYDONEN. My other contact information is Instagram at Mallory Donen, Facebook and Twitter, all at Mallory Donen. Same spelling. And I would also like to acknowledge the support of the Canada Council for the Arts for funding this art book project. And lastly, I want to thank Sin Evolution, Minah Lee, Yeonjun Chang for the opportunity to be a part of Digital Carnival Z. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory. It's my pleasure to work with amazing artists. And thank you for sharing your compelling textile works woven into your digital artworks and vice versa. Okay, we're going to bring Sarah in.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to start by gratefully acknowledging the land I'm on, the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. More specifically, I live on land settled in an ancestral village called Sinakwa in the Squamish language. Forgive my pronunciation, which today is the head of False Creek. I say this to show my solidarity with Indigenous sovereignty, to respect the ancestors who once cared for the land I'm on, and for all the land and water protectors today who continue this care for our earth and for the next generations. I also stand in solidarity with all those who have suffered losses during this pandemic, especially of loved ones and family members. I say this with one foot firmly planted on these unceded lands and the other in Latin America, in Brazil more specifically, a land of over 305 Indigenous nations where there's been terrible loss of human life by a criminal and genocidal government, and abuses of and attacks on human rights, ecological and racial justice. So while not new phenomena, there's a forceful wave of fascism moving from the north, straight from Washington to the south, from Turtle Island to Abya Yala. And I make this connection because my work as an artist, researcher, educator, filmmaker, and film programmer is tied to these solidarities, histories, herstories, and geopolitics, and how communities are dynamically responding to these challenges and resisting these powerful forces: colonialism, capitalism, surveillance, white supremacy, and patriarchy. So this may be a good segue to introduce a current work in progress I'm doing in collaboration with Sonia Medal. We're working on a documentary film project that reactivates an archive of feminist Chilean art videos from the 70s and 80s, currently housed at Vivo Media Arts. By intervening in these archives of Chilean feminist art videos, we're paying tribute to these important voices from Chile that have migrated to our local media arts community and archive. And this archival migration is significant because it helps tell other genealogies of media histories and communities in Vancouver. So while I would say the Latin American community in BC is largely invisibilized, although now there's been some recognition or at least some visibility that a lot of the food we eat is handpicked by migrant farm workers, largely from Mexico and Central America, in places like Abbotsford and all over the country. This archive shows us an important history of migration in Vancouver and how, in particular, the Chilean diaspora and by extension, Latin American communities have been and continue to be important, not only to our daily nourishment, but also to our art, culture, film, and media landscape. So a number of artists, intellectuals, poets, writers, activists fled the US-backed 1973 bloody military coup when the democratically elected president Salvador Allende was overthrown and Augusto Pinochet seized power, leading to an economic war ordered by Nixon and a decades-long dictatorship in Chile where thousands of civilians were disappeared and killed. Some Chilean political refugees made their way to Vancouver. The videos in Vivo's archives are made by mostly women artists who stayed in Chile during this terrible time. Yet this diaspora, Chilean and Latin America, and this archive are connected, and that's one of the things we explore in our film. So the archives that we activate in this documentary and also through a curated program of these original videos tell the story of state violence, torture, disappearance, patriarchy, militarism, and denounce them through these creative audiovisual acts during a time of extreme censorship and oppression. It's a project that connects us to local Latin American communities in important ways that make visible the work of Latin American women here in Vancouver, as the women we interview are integral to the art, intellectualism, feminism, culture, media histories, and activism in our city. So the project has been important to better understand an intergenerational legacy of feminist solidarity that we're connected to and continue to build from and pass on. And this work for me is not only necessary now, but I highlight it because there's a feeling of urgency to activate these networks of feminist solidarity across borders and also locally, as they and we as women, artists, mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sisters, aunts, face some of the inequities laid bare in this pandemic and witnessed in our multiple and intersecting communities, filmic, diaspora, here and there. And my conception of a feminist movement is inclusive of all gender, biological, sexual identities, and recognizes how we're all in relation to each other, the human and more than human, as part of an interdependent whole. Certainly our interconnectedness has been crystallized during this pandemic, along with all the existing inequalities. And I've been thinking about who's been the most impacted in this pandemic. And, you know, as always, it's Indigenous, Black, Asian, Brown, gender non-conforming, trans women and girls' bodies. We've seen how this pandemic is not only a health issue, it's a human rights and environmental one. We've seen how the majority of caregivers in the home and in caregiving facilities are mostly women of color, and as a result, women have been at higher risk for infection, employment loss, financial and housing precarity, and domestic violence. So to bring these gender dimensions to my lived experience, and I consider myself fortunate to be able to work, albeit on the fringes of art, film, educational, and academic realms. Yet while many of my peers, mostly male or single, were working on their next great project, as parents, mostly mothers, often working from home, we're also shouldering the domestic duties and caring for our children. We had little mental space or energy to do research, make work, let alone apply for grants, publications, or conferences. So working collectively has been a strategy to share creative, administrative, organizational responsibilities in the act of art making. This image is from a project I presented at the faculty show at Emily Carr University of Art and Design, which was also a way for ECOED faculty to collectively show precarious labor conditions of sessional faculty that I'm a part of. So here we see a bunch of women, mostly friends and artists, working to help me sew this slide cape, composed of art history slides discarded or rejected from UBC's Visual Resource Center in the age of digitization. So more personally, this project titled Cataloging is Not for Superheroes was a way to intervene in the art historical canon. So there's a playful and performative dimension to this wearable work that uses the visual language of the superhero cape to feminize the trope of what it means to be a superhero and to insert myself into this history that may not want me. The project becomes an act of decentering the male-dominated Euro-Western art historical canon that I was taught while looking at slide projections in a dark classroom to the sound of the whir of the Kodak carousel projectors, to date myself a little bit. And the cape's also a burden to be worn, this heavy history that also speaks to the inequities in the art world, in the canonization of knowledge, hierarchies, and archives. You know, what gets cataloged, documented, reproduced, taught, and displayed. It's an ongoing project in that I'd like to continue to photograph other women artists of color who remain on the periphery of our local art world, with the cape functioning as a wearable art historical intervention that recenters women artists. A project that connects this notion of centering feminist models for sustainable creation processes is an art collective I'm a part of called Art Mamas. And I know there are a number of these collectives that have formed not only here, but all over the world. As Lena mentioned, she's also part of one of these collectives. And for us, it became a means to hold each other accountable to our creative needs as artists, as well as provide a structure that integrates the chaos of child rearing and one that understands our social, gendered, sometimes racialized or diasporic intersections. Our collective was originally formed by local artists Natasha McCarty and Matilda Asislade, and it's become a critical space to develop a model of anti-patriarchal, collaborative, and feminist research creation praxis. So it used to involve us sitting around a kitchen table discussing our work or looking at each other's work. And we did an art show at Fasaka's Gallery in 2018, I believe, where we also hosted a dialogue. And as part of an upcoming residency at Access Gallery this fall, we're hosting a series of events around artisthood and motherhood. Because let's be real, the art world to this day does little to nothing for artist mothers. And I can't even tell you all how many times I've heard mostly male artists say how work by artists who become mothers always changes for the worst. So there's a derision of work that reflects this lived reality. And our aim as a collective and through our residency at Access is to uphold our local artist mother and global artist mother communities. And when I say mother, I mean those who care, nurture, and mother others. The last project I want to highlight is a collaboration between media artists Deanna Chong and myself. And this project's an evolving collaboration. And as I've said, collaboration has been integral to sustainable creation models for myself and a lot of the women I work with, especially women of color and caregivers. And as we continue to think about how to shift our social structures from a predatory surveillance capitalist model to a community, economy, and temporality of care, part of my personal sense of resistance to the defuturing or death project of capitalism is to slow down and pay attention to what really matters. So while it was a gift to have had those months being with, learning from, and caring for my son, it's not valued in any economy or career. And so Deanna and I were responding to this social blind spot that centers white male Eurocentric modes, not only of creation, but of framing the narrative. So this is documentation of our first iteration of what became Recipes for Undomestication. It started out as a sound piece that we did for a radio program in Vienna, led by Peter Kortmasch at the Western Front. The project was designed to not only make fun of ourselves as anti-conceptual sound artists, but making the practice of listening a political act that responds to our lived realities as women, as caregivers, occupying the domestic space as a politicized space that has been negated and excluded as serious art. In January 2020, we did a more intentional and choreographed version. One of our intentions was to recenter care as integral to a political imagination that makes other worlds possible, and one that counters capitalist conceptions of efficiency and accelerated productivity in favor of temporalities that honor relationship building with those we care for and what we care about. And we included sounds from street protests and feminist movement that aligned with our values and struggles, including the feminist anthem from the Chilean art collective Las Tesis. This project's a dialogue with an evolving social political reality that continues to resist the ongoingness of patriarchy. It's a project that critiques those power structures and assumes our agency as artists. So I'd like to end with this idea of proposing feminist models for sustainable creation as an act of resistance, because we create a microcosm that shows other possibles are real and these reals are possible. So this demand for change, for a model of creation that is inclusive of our bodies, of our temporalities as caregivers, of our gendered realities, is an act of speculative world making. And I'll just show a short documentation of this performance. Thanks, that's the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So we're going to bring everyone to the table, round table. Yeah. Does any of you need bio break? No. If not, we're gonna just start. Yeah. Relaxed, and yeah, of course, if anyone needs bio break, just go ahead. Take it easy. Thank you so much. So obviously I can really I witnessed how you as an artist employ those feminist or the creative strategies you employ as artist against this patriarchal capitalism. And I can definitely see and feel the oppression and violence that is embedded in that system and putting pressure on you. So, and you're processing that as an artist and sharing with other folks. I really appreciated, Lena, you shared this powerful piece revisiting your ancestors, like great grandmothers, food bounded, and processing that as a person living today and living in the capitalist society, how you can actually bring a lot of issues out of that, like intergenerational traumatic connection. And also we also witnessed Mallory's work. You actually emphasize as stress when you are human bodies or machine bodies are stressed, what happens? And those kind of questions are really interesting and very relevant. And Sarah, you talk about those Latin American people and migration and how those traumas are present and archival of those traumas. Those are all really powerful. And it's interesting that you all are very, very much active in like institutions and also academia that is like inherently very patriarchal and colonial. So I'm just wondering how you practice self-care while surviving the system. If you can go around.
I was just going to say, I sort of think of self-care as collective care. You know, if the collective is okay, then everyone's okay, and if it, that idea of that we are all interconnected. So when one of us is not okay, then we're all not okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Mallory speaking. I agree with Sarah. For me, it's like checking in like with yourself also means checking in with others. So similarly to Lena and Sarah, I also have a collection of artist friends that we meet regularly to check in and see how each other are doing. And it can sometimes be a discussion of our art practice, but other times it's like, how are you doing mentally and how are you getting through these times? But also like individually, for me, it's also about like checking in like with your body and knowing to like respond to it, like when you need to take care of yourself. Like I think Lena really touched on that as well, is like how her social practice can really impact her individually. So that's the end of my thought.
This is Lena speaking. I think that one of the things that the pandemic has hopefully normalized a bit more is the practice of saying no and taking mental health days and asserting one's boundaries around work and life. I don't think it's always successful, and obviously there's a certain amount of privilege that goes into being able to say no. But I think in my life, I have seen people being more accepting of the fact that sometimes something is just not going to get done when you thought it was going to get done. And I hope that this is something that continues and isn't just because of the pandemic, that folks are becoming more aware that due to the internet and our phone usage, this sense of being constantly connected also means a lot of us feel like we're constantly working, and that it's not possible to have any actual time for rest and recuperation. So I don't have any great answers for self-care because I think I'm really bad at it. But I will say that after the shootings in Atlanta, Georgia, I did turn on my vacation responder and I did cancel a bunch of meetings and classes. And although I think I'm pretty high functioning and I'm a trauma survivor and very in tune with my body and what I can do, even if I didn't feel like a breakdown was imminent, I think the practice of doing that normalizes it for other people for whom maybe it's like even more necessary or maybe more like debilitating, because some people deal with chronic pain or like have a disability that isn't related to a current event or a collective trauma, right? But it's something that they have to grapple with day in, day out. So how do we create environments where it's okay for anyone to say no? And that kind of means that even if you're really high functioning and capable and resilient, to take that time off.
Yeah, thank you. I think you answered a lot of things, and the question I was going to ask next is, I think, very related to the first question as well. And also you, Lena, already answered a lot of questions. So I also share this thought with you that I thought about this panelists, you folks, when the Atlanta shooting happened, and yeah, I noticed that your email notification, and I felt like, okay, you're doing a good, right thing. Yeah, I wanted to really ask once again, like, as artists who are very sensitive to survivals and issues of survivals, and because we do have a lot of barriers as people, social beings who experience those oppressions, systemic oppression, that are, so we are very like hard workers. You're very hard workers, I can tell. And how do we like help one another slow down? That is very difficult.
I can. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, have a kid. It really helps you slow down. You know, helps you be in the moment. Helps you have to say no. Helps you just focus on nothing. No, I'm being a bit facetious, but that is something that definitely has allowed me to think about time in a different way and forced me to be in the moment, and reminds me to be in the moment in important ways. So that yeah, that's definitely, you know, for better or worse, it inevitably slows me down.
This is Mallory. I was gonna say, I feel like I did something like this last night, where, because I work a full-time job outside of my art practice, and so I finish the day and then I spend most of my evenings cross-stitching. And I found myself a little bit burnt out, and I was like, I think this is the time that I need to stop and give myself like the last 2 hours of awake time just to not be working. So I find that I have to, I think as I've been growing and like adapting to this work-life balance that I've been doing, I'm learning to be more cognizant of like, when do I have to turn off the working side of things, which can be really challenging, especially when everything is all in one place, of course. Yeah, I think that was the end of my thought. There might have been something else, but I'll pop in again if I think of it.
This is Lena. It's so funny that you said that, Mallory, because I was going to say, well, it seems like Mallory's practice is like so mindful and all about being in the present moment. But like now I'm learning, oh, actually, for you, it's like work and you're like trying to be productive. Because I don't have an answer to this question. Like, I feel like I'm really bad at slowing down. Like, I take baths and I do yoga and meditation, but I have to confess, half the time I do those things, it's because I know I'm supposed to, and it's on a to-do list that I made for myself. And I'm like, yeah, if I do this, I'll be more productive later. So it's not the right intention involved.
Lena, I am the same way. I'm neurotically organized. I have a calendar with like things that I'm doing each day, and it's, yeah. I schedule in my workouts because it's a task. It's a thing to do. It's a workout. Work isn't that word, anyways.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You're definitely caregivers, but also you deserve receiving care, certainly. Either it's self-care or the collective care given by the community. I wanted to a little bit delve deeper into the COVID-19 pandemic and this durational challenge, how this has affected your labors as an artist or any other hats you wear. Mm-hmm.
I can start. This is Mallory speaking again. For me, I was gonna say, just like related to like a lot of people ask like, how has the pandemic like affected your work? And I think for me, the shift for me actually started before the pandemic. For me, it was like transitioning from being a student to being a full-time worker. and having to adapt my practice into being one that wasn't so experimental anymore. Or like when I was doing my master's, I would try so many other things and I would make things at a larger scale. And I really started to see like the effects of like the amounts of work that I was making and like the costs and all those things that you have to factor in. I really started to, I feel like that is why I kind of geared my work more towards the cross stitching and like the domestic kind of works, because they fit within the space that I was working as well. But it also, by using more like time consuming processes that I've been using, it's forced me to slow down, because it takes a very long time to cross stitch. So like that has been almost like a restraint that I've like given myself to like limit the amount of work that I'm producing as well. And that's something that I've been trying to explore more with like this idea of making work and then undoing it, so that it's like it only exists at like a certain moment in time, but then also like there's the labor of doing the work and then taking it away as well. So that's the end of my thought.
This is Lena speaking. I am in graduate school and was in graduate school this year when the pandemic hit. And I was spending 12 hours anymore. I was at home. And that meant that in between classes, I could, cook my own meals instead of just like buying food or, doing something really quick. I could take a nap if I needed a nap. I was just spending more time at home, taking more walks and doing things that I would have liked to do with graduate school, but it didn't seem possible then. But simultaneously, my work schedule got really busy. I applied to a lot of different grants and open calls, and luckily, I have a lot of collaborative projects and work digitally. So some of these works translate despite all of this, having various, other stressors and financial stressors. So it's been a very productive time for me. But yeah, like I feel a bit of anxiety about what this transition means, particularly, is the expectation now, 12-hour days on campus, because I don't actually want that again, I don't think.
I was just going to say really quickly, Lena, you said you weren't good at self-care, but you just said that you took naps. So clearly you're doing something right.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing those moments when we really feel like human. And that makes me think about the glitch Mallory actually shares with us when machines make those mistakes or those failures of the machine, and how that actually you can mobilize those failures to really create space or create another world. To ask you, I think it's very related to Sarah, your work as well, and also like intergenerational communication you all emphasize. What kind of technology or method of archiving you are imagining for, let's say, decolonial future? It's a big question. And
that's a really big question that I don't know if I feel like I have the answer to, but I think what's important is that people have control of their own technology, and that there's that kind of technological sovereignty, even, that people have access to the tools they need to document their own stories, to tell their stories, to archive their stories, and who is able to access that. The first stakeholder should be the communities that are the ones that are have control over that. And I think archaeology as a whole kind of field of study that seems like there's been interest in So, it gets complicated because in a way the internet had that utopian vision of being accessible to all, and you could put something on the internet and it would be, this place that everyone could access. And we also know that there's all these other interests that are there and creating barriers and walls. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is, because I think it's such a complicated big question. But yeah, I mean, I'm working with technology that I have access to. I do projects that I work with what I have access to, depending on available resources and funds, and sometimes they're more meager, and sometimes I get a grant and I'm able to do a little bit more. But yeah, that's how I work. I don't know, Mallory and Lena, how you see that.
I was just going to say, related to that, this is Mallory speaking, that I think like what's important for me, and like I think that both of you guys have shown, is that like I think visibility and like representation of different like the work that isn't being seen. Like I think like that's what I feel like I try to do with like the like the passing on of like these traditional like women's mediums, is to have more visibility of it. Because if like it doesn't continue to go on, then it could become like a lost thing. I think specifically, like I think it was like, I think I'm thinking of Lena's work, the Only Bands work, like you're saying, like more visibility on like the problems that sex workers face and that kind of thing. So if we aren't making that work, then it isn't getting seen. So that, I think it's about, yeah, for me, visibility. That's the end of my thought.
Yeah, I think technology, like any other tool, has its like pros and cons, and it's just a reflection of its creators and its users, right? It can be used to incite violence, but it can also be used to heal. And yeah, the internet, it's valuable because it's connection, it's creativity, it's knowledge. But you have to look at, who holds power over these platforms and who profits. And I mean, the online world is also like the offline world. Like there is not actually a separation anymore, particularly now, between what takes place on screen and elsewhere, right? And so I think, yeah, representation of stories absolutely matters, and that's something I try to do in my office. But one thing I learned, especially with ultimately, we are protesting unjust policies on platforms that were not built by us or for us. So the real answer then is to actually have power over those platforms, or to start your own. And I think more people are becoming aware of that today. But of course, it's very difficult. The tech industry is like any other industry, as idealistic as it can be. Is dominated by mostly white men who come from prestige and influence. So, I battle, but it's lovely that, through technology and social media, these are things that we can actually talk about as well.
Yeah, just to add to that thought, that Sarah talking, and thinking about that idea of the glitch, I think that's interesting that within these, huge tech giants, the artists are kind of like the glitch in that system. And they're appropriating technology to do these other things and tell other stories. So yeah, I think that idea of that you brought up, and glitch feminism and so on, I think is an interesting kind of intervention in that space.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say, this is Mallory. That book that I read, Glitch Feminism, I feel like the main thing that I got from it was that like to be a glitch was to like be this like act of resistance. And so it really resonated with me. And I think that, yeah, any form of resistance is a glitch. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that we kind of acknowledge the limitations of the technology and what it is. It's actually originated from military inventions. So we have to kind of be aware where it's coming from and use it really wisely and caring for other people who are marginalized within that. Thank you so much for really sharing your amazing works that subvert those like big issues, big problems, and turn that into an active resistance and collective action. We're going to open the space for people who are here and let them ask questions and have conversation with you. This is Minah again. I think it's Zoom platform can make people really shy. It's not always
so there
very.
is a question. This is Yeonju again. So just for the benefit of folks who are in the audience, I want to say if you would like to ask your question verbally, also feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. And then Lynn can enable your microphone and you can ask your question verbally. But meanwhile, Tyler has a question which I'll read out. As circumstances change, we establish new modes of self-care. I find it a challenge to have my methods of self-care migrate along with me. I wonder if you have any thoughts on how to help your methods of self-care transit to new circumstances.
This is Lena speaking. I think the number one thing that has been most helpful for me is having people to be accountable to. And I don't usually have a problem when it comes to getting work done by a deadline, but I have problems with, doing yoga or, meditating or journaling and all of that stuff. And I was really lucky to have a strong community in Europe, where I lived for 6 years. And I really missed different friends and collaborators when I moved back to the US for graduate school. But after the pandemic, when we were all online, I actually found I was better in touch with those European friends and collaborators. And with one of my best friends, Molly, who's a photographer in Sweden, I actually woke up every day at 8 a.m. Eastern time and did a workout with her. Made one of my goals having a larger butt by the end of the year. And that was what Molly and I did together, like butt exercises. And it was a lovely way to stay in touch with a friend. And like I would not have woken up that early and I would not have done that exercise without her. And it was as much about her company as it was about, getting my body physically moving in the morning. So I think that's helped me, knowing that someone is there waiting for me to call them on Zoom or whatever, so that they can also take care of themselves. Then I'm far more likely to engage in something that's good for myself as well.
Just to add to that, this is Mallory. I was going to say, I think I was along the same thoughts as you, Lena, and that goal setting is really important. So I did the same. I did very similar thing, like with my sister. We would set goals, like this is what I'm going to do for workouts. So we would like check in with each other, like how's it going? But also in related to like the aspects of care. My friend and I, we both live alone. And so we've been each other's like people that we've been able to visit in person with. And we kind of alternate cooking a meal on the weekend for each other. And that also has added to like the care aspect, is like we get a night off from cooking, like that person gets to like cook us a meal and we've got like the support and mental break if it's needed, because there are less breaks like in our lives these days where, you get to, I feel like there's like more like integrated like social breaks that you get in a more regular day flow, as opposed to when you're at home all day, you don't get those. I mean, even just, I was starting to realize that I used to visit people at their desks at work, and just that small bit of social interaction is like a really nice change of pace. So I'm starting to actually video call people just for like a 5-minute, like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Let's see your, like, how are you? And I think that is also a really good thing for mental health, is frequent short visits are also important, I think. So yeah, that's the end of my thought.
This is Minah. Thank you for sharing your experiences of long distance care. I think that's very important. I totally understand, as a person who has been living apart from my old mother for a long time, and how I'm trying to like reestablishing my relationship with kind of the awareness of, you know, the new world and challenges of mobility. But that also makes me think about those, you know, you talked about, you cared so much about, you know, those migrant farmers and sex workers and really marginalized people whose bodies can't really rest. And, you know, they are, you know, there's different levels of conditions of mobility. And even though they cross border, their bodies are just disposable. And there are a lot of like problems and heavy issues that really kind of comes into trickling into my mind as I'm, you know, taking my own time and my own space and thinking about those. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing all those great practices and experiences. It fills my heart. That was end of my thoughts. Anyone in the audience who wants to share your thoughts or any questions? Yeah, by the way, Tyler said, wow, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Deanne says, thanks to you all, wonderful thoughts and imagery. No question, but an observation that the intimacy has a nice echo to the more political activist elements. Yeah, thank you. It's beautiful. Yeah. Imagery, like creating imagery, like requires a lot of labor. And also, you guys have been really great describing yourselves and, you know, identifying yourself when you speak, and I always forget.
Me too. Sorry, I feel like I haven't been as good as my peers here in the space at doing that. Sarah talking, but yeah, thank you both to Minah and Yunju for bringing us together and being able to share on these different ideas. I was going to also comment, Lena, I liked your idea of mutual care as part of this, you know, as kind of as survival, like, you know, for us to be able to move forward, that idea of mutual care and centering care as a way to move forward. And I think it is something that it needs to be taken really seriously if we're going to break with, you know, all of this, so many of these inequalities we're witnessing. So I think that's a nice idea to think about or leave with.
This is Minah. Thank you. Any thoughts? Last thoughts before?
This is Mallory speaking. I had another thought, and I think it was one that I had earlier, but you made me think of it again, Sarah, so I'll share now. And it was about something that Lena had said. It was related to this idea that like we've all kind of learned to say no more, and how that's gonna like carry over moving forward. And I think that that's like really important. I feel like during this time, like it's, what's the word? It's just like increased or accelerated. Yeah, that's the word. Accelerated the speed in which people have like learned to take ownership of like knowing when to say no and those types of conversations. And I do think like everybody's kind of being more like knowledgeable about how to do that. And I really hope that it does carry forward and that people realize that like the importance of their mental health. And I think, yeah, that was the end of my thought. So.
I just wanted to, this is Lena speaking. I just wanted to say, I think it's really amazing to have a panel that's dedicated to this particular topic. And certainly I've already seen a, resurgence of interest in care and feminized labor recently, but I think the pandemic has really amplified the awareness over these issues. And I hope that that also isn't just a trend, but something that continues. At Carnegie Mellon, which is where I'm doing my graduate program, there have been 3 female faculty members in recent years who have had children and who are not tenured. And I think that, beyond the guidance that I am offered by these faculty members in an academic and professional capacity, I think simply their choice to do that and to live their lives has been such a source of inspiration, just like the type of guidance I get from the members of maternal fantasies who are mothers and who are practicing artists and who are older than me. Like, I think just talking about these issues and like watching it happen in practice and being public about it rather than hiding one's family life or hiding one's caregiving work, whatever that caregiving work consists of, I think that does so much to change the public perception. And it's super necessary in the arts, or else, it's going to be impossible for people who are caregivers to continue to take part in this art world.
Yeah, I actually heard a kind of chilling statistic that 1.5 million women were lost employment in Canada since the pandemic, and over 50 or up to 55% of women's employment has been reduced. So it is a chilling statistic, and we know it's mostly women of color and caregivers that have had to make those choices in their families. Or so yeah, and even when you said those were tenured or non-tenured professors, I feel like women or mothers are often not hired or not tenured and not promoted. So it creates this cycle of precarious labor for women who have dependents and so on. Yeah, so there's still a lot to be done. I still feel like, more than a recession, I've heard of it called as a she session. So yeah, there's definitely still lots that, that needs to be done there.
Yeah, this is Minah, so thank you so much. And let's not forget to care for ourselves. That's the beginning of the beginning. Okay, so we are, I think, here. We're going to bring Yeonju back to wrap it up and introduce maybe our remaining workshop, our remaining panel that is also about care and specifically on social media. So Yeonju, can we bring you back?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you, Minah and Lena, Mallory, and Sarah for that wonderful discussion. It was great to learn more about your practice, more deeply, and also to, to hear where your work is overlapping and the different things that you're thinking about, right now, and your hopes for the future. I do think there has been a resurgence of interest in notions of craft and notions of care and women's labor. So hopefully these are conversations that we can continue to have. And I really want to say too, like something I noticed even throughout this this past 90 minutes is, even though I think there's a lot of bold work that is being discussed and made, and critical, sentiments that are being expressed, like the overall ambience is just like one that is very meditative and comforting. So I think there's also something really special about that, and it's really such an honor and privilege for Sin Evolution to be able to hold that space for this conversation. So coming up, just want to let folks know about some of our upcoming events. Our featured artists, Nancy Lee and Kieran Bumber, are going to be giving a talk this Saturday, that's May 15th, from 2 to 3 p.m. About the creative process behind their exhibition Union. And there was a remark, I think, that Lena made about, or maybe actually it was Sarah, about, like how grants, create the ability for artists to produce work and sort of alleviate some of that precarity. And so one of the ways that Nancy and Kieran talks about their work, which is a dystopian wedding set in the year 3000, is that the Canada Council grant is really in some ways like a dowry for them to be able to enact a wedding ceremony that otherwise would not be able to come into being. So I thought that was a really cool connection. And as Minah mentioned, on Thursday, May 20th, so a week from now at 6:30, Angelic Proof and Gina Goiko are going to be hosting a conversation that's all about visionary organizing on social media, the limits and possibilities of touch, tenderness, and timelessness. Very much, following on the conversation we were just having about technology and its limitations, but also I think their interest in kind of excavating the potentials that are there. So hopefully some of you will be able to join us for that as well. And lastly, I just want to say thank you again to everyone, and to our interpreters as well, who've been working hard. Yeah, so just thank you everyone, and have a great rest of the evening.